Hey guys, Snapkin back with another Manga Monday. So this week I'm going to be doing something a little different. I'm going to be going over my thoughts and rating Goodnight Punpun. So spoiler warning and also trigger warning. There are some dark themes in this series. So and this is also explicit content. It has that on every single book. So yeah, it's sort of like a coming to age slice of life book, and we are in a couple different perspectives in this book. So the main one is obviously Punpun, and then we also see his uncle Yuichi and his friends from childhood, Seiki, and later on we get to meet Sachi. So the first thing I want to talk about is why he is depicted like this. He's just so broad and vague. Why? My interpretation is because you can basically picture just about anyone in that role. If something happens in this book and you relate to it, you could probably definitely see yourself in this role, or anyone else. If something that you know happened at some point, you could definitely, it's like easy to put yourself in that situation. Obviously some things that happen in this book you don't want to be put in those situations, but that's just kind of my interpretation. I could be completely wrong. So going through the first book, it's just kind of, we see Punpun growing up, going through different experiences in elementary school. We get to see his first love, Aiko, and also some things happened with his parents. His mom's in the hospital, his dad moves away. I think one huge takeaway from this book is Aiko and the fact that he is obsessed with stars and space, which he got that obsession from Aiko. So those are two things that will come back later on in the series that I think are super important. His obsession with stars, I think he's just kind of looking for a way to escape. I think subconsciously he kind of knows that life is not all sunshine and rainbows, and there's just kind of like a place to escape. And also he's just trying to impress Aiko. A big part of this book is him being obsessed with Aiko. Punpun's mom goes to the hospital, or she's already in the hospital and something serious happened. And Punpun rushes in, and he promised Aiko that he would meet her to run away with her, which didn't happen because he was on the way to the hospital to meet his mom. And this is something I think is super important because he never mentions that to Aiko. I don't know if Aiko ever knows that's why. Even if she did, I don't think she would care. That's just kind of the character that she is. And lastly, the thing that I want to bring up finally that we see throughout the book is the sort of god that Punpun imagines up. So we see this guy showing up all throughout the book. And this is when Punpun prays, tinkle hoy, and then he shows up, he kind of spouts some stuff to Punpun to try to make him feel better. Later on we see, my interpretation, I know we'll get to this later, but I kind of want to address it in the first, what their desires are. I think this is Punpun's desire, because later on we see Punpun and this so-called god. The god is kind of like etching him on to kill someone, and I think deep down it's kind of like not necessarily desires, but also just like dark thoughts in general. Yeah, that's kind of like the entire. Now, book 2, we see Punpun. Punpun is now in middle school, and we see that he joined the badminton team. And he has some competition with Aiko, a boy that she's dating. So, eventually it comes to a contest where if Yaguchi is able to take the tournament at a badminton tournament, then he gets to stay with Aiko because they are currently dating. But if he loses, then Punpun gets Aiko forever. And we see that Aiko is not so much over Punpun at all, because during the tournament, she's just kind of like, run away with me, blah, blah, blah. Really irked me. A lot of what Goodnight Punpun is, as well, is we can see the children kind of sort of taking on different attributes of their parents, which is super realistic, let's be honest. But this series is really good at pointing out real life details, which is one reason why I really like this series as well. Other than that, we get to see a little more of Yuichi's story, his Punpun's uncle, and it gets really dark. I'm just not gonna mention anything here because it's YouTube and I don't really know what I'm able to say. Moving on to book 3, we can sort of see more of Punpun growing up in high school, and his thoughts kind of start getting darker and darker. So in book 3, he is obsessed with wanting to sleep with someone, but basically he becomes a pretty big asshole. We can see the development of Punpun throughout books 1 and 3, so I'm going to try to go through these books, try to not ramble on. Book 4, so book 4 is where it starts to get a little darker. Book 4, Punpun moves out on his own. He gets his own apartment, and he sort of shuts himself off from basically everyone. The one thing that I like about book 4 is how they, and with the rest of the series, from book 4 and on, they depict Punpun so well. We can see Punpun changing shapes. He becomes like a triangular prism. Kind of, I think, to depict that he's being closed off. He's like a triangle and then something happens. It makes him feel really good. He changes back to his normal self, but then the switch just like brings him back to like being a triangle or whatever. And then we get to meet Sachi. So Sachi, we met her, I think, in book 3 at a museum, and she had a piece of art that Punpun was pretty obsessed with. Not obsessed, but he related to it so well. It was of space. See, in book 1, we mentioned that space was a big theme. So we see that, but she comes back, and she asks him to help her write a manga. Something super important that happens in this book is that Sachi is able to open Punpun back up and restore him to his actual self. I think Aiko usually brings out the worst in Punpun, whereas Sachi kind of, even though they're being selfish, and you know they're being selfish. In Sachi's and Punpun's relationship, they're both being selfish, but in a way, they help each other out. It's kind of like this weird relationship where they kind of bring the best out in each other, but also they're kind of just doing it for themselves. Maybe they're subconsciously trying to be better for the other person, but they're kind of good for each other. Throughout this book, we can see some things that happen with Punpun. So Punpun and Sachi kind of have, not necessarily a fight, but they sort of disconnect. And this is because Punpun isn't necessarily over Aiko yet. And so Punpun kind of goes through some mental instabilities, and he tries to put himself in the shoes of someone else. He calls himself someone completely different, and he just becomes a completely different person. And when that happens, he meets Aiko. Aiko just shows up out of nowhere. So we see Aiko show up, and they kind of reconnect, but Aiko is sort of not wanting more serious relationship, which changes later on. But basically in this book, towards the end, Sachi is pregnant with her ex-husband's child, and she wants him to help her through an abortion. So he has to make the choice of choosing Aiko or going to that abortion. And he chooses Aiko. And that is one thing that I was disappointed in Punpun with, because Aiko, in my opinion, brings out the worst in Punpun, and Sachi usually brings out the good in Punpun. The series, here's book 1 all the way to book 6. Look how, so it's colorful, and then it gets darker and darker while as the story goes on. And obviously that's on purpose. We see how abusive Aiko's mother is emotionally and physically, which I can see sort of the same-ish. Aiko kind of takes on some of that personality as well. Aiko takes on sort of that personality throughout the series. We can see that Aiko kind of makes Punpun feel horrible for things that I don't think she should have, which is obvious emotional abuse and manipulation, which I think sort of ties in with his character a lot. A lot of like why he struggles is because of Aiko, and it's obviously not entirely her fault. That's just kind of like how she grew up. She's going through a lot as well. She's just trying to find someone to like put faith into her. She wants someone to go all in for her, because her parent just does not give the affection that she needs. Not only does she not give the affection that she needs, but she completely destroys Aiko in general, physically and emotionally. So we see Aiko and Punpun go to Aiko's mother because they're telling her that they're gonna go live on their own. They're gonna run away. Not necessarily run away. They're kind of adults now, so. But we see Aiko's mother being completely manipulative towards Aiko. At some point, Aiko's mother snaps, comes at her with a knife, and Punpun strangles Aiko's mom. Not to death, because we see later that Aiko actually killed her with a knife. After that, they sort of dump her body and they leave. So throughout the story, he's sort of this stick character, but he gets an actual human body. Not only that, but his whole head is just like shadowed over. You can't see his eyes, you can't see, well, at some point you can see multiple eyes to show, I think, that he's like a demon or something. But later on, we can see Punpun sort of tells Aiko to gouge one of his eyes out, or like stab his eye, so that his vision is literally only on Aiko, which is what Aiko kind of wants, right? So they run away, and throughout this story, Punpun is sort of just like this shadowed out character, and this is one of my favorite panels in the book too. And it's funny because they were talking about how nice of a kid he was. That's one of my favorite panels in the series. Towards the end of the book, we see that Aiko's mom was discovered, and they're trying to find Aiko because they're saying that she's missing. And then we get to the final volume. So this one's obviously thinner. It's more lighthearted cover than the 4th or 5th and 6th volume or book. So in this one, we kind of see the story wrap up. Punpun struggles through so much towards the end. So does Aiko. Punpun learns that Aiko actually killed her mother. Aiko dies. I think that's the part that I cried, or I started tearing up at, because Punpun really, for sure, thought they were going to be together. And we see him just sort of struggle through. He was going to end up dying as well. Luckily, and this is why Sachi is one of my favorite characters in the story, right? She finds Punpun before he ends up dying and saves Punpun, which I'm not surprised. I'm literally not surprised. Like I said earlier, Sachi, I think, brings out the best in Punpun. Whether she thinks she's doing it or not, I think she's doing, bringing out the best in Punpun, and Punpun does the same with Sachi, I believe. in the end, we sort of get a happy-ish ending, except for Aiko. Yes, Aiko did deserve a lot better. Let's be honest. I liked Aiko, but at times she was being super manipulative. But when was anyone ever being completely super good per se in this story? Punpun was an asshole. Sachi was an asshole. Aiko was an asshole. I wanted it to be on the shorter side, but I kind of ramble. And I hope I talked about all the themes that I was thinking about talking about. Obviously, there's a ton of things that I did not cover in this video. There's just way too much to actually cover. At least for these videos that I want to do. But overall, I would give this a 9 out of 10. Goodnight Punpun is a 9 out of 10 in my book. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, my thoughts on Goodnight Punpun. This is my very first thought video, so I hope in the future when I do more of these, they will be better and better. Because right now I feel like I'm just rambling on. And there's no sort of like real points or topics that I'm actually really covering. But I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to subscribe, leave a like, comment, and yeah, I'll see you guys in the next video. Until next time.